Hi everyone, this lesson is on Familial Mediterranean Fever, or FMF. So in this lesson we'll discuss some of the pathophysiology behind why this condition occurs. We'll also talk about some of the signs and symptoms of Familial Mediterranean Fever, along with some important complications we need to look out for. We'll also discuss how this condition is diagnosed and how it's treated. So Familial Mediterranean Fever is also known as Recurrent Polyserositis, Periodic Peritonitis, Familial Paroxysmal Polyserositis, and Riemann syndrome. So a variety of alternative names for this condition, and we'll see later when we talk about some of the signs and symptoms as to why we use some of these particular names. And this is a hereditary autoinflammatory condition. So hereditary, we're going to get it from our parents, so it's a genetic condition. And more specifically, it is a autosomal recessive condition, meaning that we need 2 copies of a gene, or 2 alleles of a gene for this condition to manifest itself. So your parents might only have 1 copy of an allele of this condition. We'll talk about the gene a bit later. But if they have 1 copy each, they are not going to show or manifest this condition. But if you get both copies yourself, you're going to manifest this condition. So this is the reason why it is an autosomal recessive condition. So it can often skip generations if we look back in the family tree. Now, this condition is going to have an onset usually in childhood. So for the most part, in childhood, 90% of cases will have an onset prior to the age of 20, but in some cases we may see patients have an onset after 20, and perhaps in the 30s and 40s. And in some cases, patients might have had symptoms for a long time. They might have started to have symptoms when they were a child or a teenager, and they were never diagnosed, and they eventually get diagnosed later. This can also happen as well. Now, as its name implies, it is going to be related to Mediterranean descent. So it's most common in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern descent. We can see it in Greek populations, Ashkenazi Jew populations, Iranian populations, and Armenian populations, among some others as well. And this is going to be the most common periodic fever syndrome. So there are other types of conditions that cause a periodic fever, but this is going to be the most common ones. So if we see a patient with recurrent fevers over time, and especially if they have a Mediterranean or Middle Eastern ancestry, we really have to think about this condition. So that's going to be the most common periodic fever syndrome. So let's talk about the pathophysiology of familial Mediterranean fever. So this condition is going to be due to a mutation in MEFV gene. And this gene produces a protein called pyrin. And it also has an alternative name, myrinostrin. So I'll refer to it as pyrin. So the mutations can be up to 300 or so mutations in this gene that can lead to issues with pyrin, this protein. Some of them can be nonsense mutations, meaning that there's a change in codon that leads to a stop codon, so it leads to a shortened or truncated protein. The protein's not completed. And some mutations can be missense mutations. There can be a change of the codon to lead to a change in amino acid, and that can affect the entire structure of this protein. And this gene is going to be on chromosome 16. And pyrin is a protein that's going to be expressed primarily in neutrophils. And neutrophils are white blood cells that are involved in dealing with bacterial infections. So pyrin more specifically is involved in inflammasome assembly and in innate immunity. So what that means simply is that it's going to be involved in inflammation. So in familial Mediterranean fever, because there's a mutation in this gene that encodes for pyrin, so there'll be an issue with pyrin. There's going to be uninhibited pyrin function, and this leads to an increased level of interleukin-1. So this is going to be the hallmark issue in this condition. Interleukin-1 is going to increase, and interleukin-1 is an immune system cytokine. It is involved in causing a fever. It's involved in acute inflammation. It's also involved in activating the endothelium to express adhesion molecules. So it has a variety of functions, but the keys are going to be a fever and inflammation. So that's going to be the reason why we can see issues in familial Mediterranean fever. So it can lead to inflammation of the peritoneum, so the lining within the abdominal cavity can lead to peritonitis. It can lead to inflammation of the lung pleura, so it can lead to pleuritis, and it can also lead to pericarditis in some cases as well. And it can also lead to inflammation of the joints. So along with all the inflammation of those serous type tissues, can also lead to a fever as well. So this is all going to be the reason why we see the signs and symptoms in this condition. And additionally, I just want to quickly mention the fact that because this is primarily expressed in neutrophils, this pyrin protein, neutrophils also release something called neutrophil extracellular traps, or NETs. These are chromatin filaments that are released by neutrophils during inflammation, and they also contain interleukin 1. Now, pyrin also regulates the formation and release of these neutrophil extracellular traps as well. So this is another connection to the pathophysiology and why we can see increased levels of interleukin 1 as well. Now let's discuss some of the signs and symptoms of this condition. So the hallmark findings of familial Mediterranean fever are going to be recurrent episodes and attacks of fever and severe pain in different parts of the body. We'll discuss that here in a moment. Before we have these attacks, though, there can be prodromal symptoms. Some of these include irritability, anxiety, and nausea. So as someone starts to have a beginning of an attack, they may not have the fever or some of that severe pain, but they start to have other symptoms, these more vague symptoms. Irritability, anxiety, and nausea are some of those that can occur. So those are the prodromal symptoms. But what is going to be key here is the fever and serositis. As mentioned again, it's due to high levels of interleukin 1. So we get fever, we get serositis or inflammation of serous tissues. And again, these lead to pleuritis, so the lung pleura becomes inflamed. Peritonitis, the peritoneum within the abdominal cavity becomes inflamed. And arthritis, the joints, some of the lining in the joints become inflamed. So this is all going to lead to severe chest pain, severe abdominal pain, and severe joint pain. So the pain, again, is going to be severe. And some patients may also have the following: a rash. So they can often have rashes around their affected joints, and they can also have a headache as well. So the attacks are going to develop kind of gradually over the course of 2 to 4 hours, and then they'll peak. Then the duration of the attack can last for 6 hours, even up to days, in some cases up to 4 days. So the duration of attacks can be very long. This can be a very, very debilitating condition. And a complication I wanted to mention that's important to recognize is secondary amyloidosis, which can lead to kidney failure. So this is going to occur in patients that are not treated. So very important. We need to recognize this condition and treat it. Now, there are some potential triggers of the attacks or episodes in this condition. Some of the triggers have been postulated to be things like menstruation or changes in the menstrual cycle, cold exposure, psychological stress, and physical activity. So all these may be potential triggers of this condition. So attacks can look something like this. If we were to think about no symptoms and then having an attack and then resolving and having no symptoms again. So some important points to make note of with regards to the recurrence of these attacks is that the severity of attacks can vary. So some attacks can be more severe than others. So they can be longer lasting. They can have more severe symptoms, so more severe pain in some cases. And there can be periods of normalcy between attacks. So once one attack resolves, there can be some period of time where a patient may have no symptoms or minimal symptoms. And some cases there can be 1 week to years between attacks. Now let's discuss how this condition is diagnosed and treated. So the diagnosis is often going to be a clinical diagnosis. So if we see some of these symptoms, especially in young patient populations, a recurrence of these attacks, and these patients have Mediterranean or Middle Eastern ancestry, this can be something that either increases the suspicion of this condition, or it actually can be used to make a clinical diagnosis. To confirm diagnosis, we can use genetic testing. And then it's important to also look at blood work as well. There can be elevated acute inflammatory markers. There can be elevated white blood cell count, especially during an attack. And then a urine analysis can be important as well. We can check for protein in the urine. We can also check for blood in the urine. Some patients, a small percentage of patients, will have blood in their urine. If they have not been treated for a long period of time and they start to develop secondary amyloidosis, they can start to have protein in their urine. And it can also be important to check blood work for their kidney function as well. Now let's talk about treatment. So as we mentioned before, these attacks resolve spontaneously, but that's not going to be good enough because we need to prevent these attacks from occurring in the first place because of that complication of secondary amyloidosis. So colchicine is going to be the key treatment for this condition. So colchicine can be taken daily, and again, it's going to be important for preventing the attacks from occurring and also preventing secondary amyloidosis in the future. And in some cases, patients who don't have familial Mediterranean fever but have a family history of it, they can even be put on colchicine as well, just to prevent attacks from occurring in the first place and prevent some of the complications. Biologics can also be used as well. So these are interleukin-1 inhibitors. So anakinra can be used, and canakinumab can also be used as well. These are going to be more expensive medications, but these can also be used as well. But again, what I really want you to take away here is colchicine is going to be the key treatment for familial Mediterranean fever. I hope you found this lesson helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe for more lessons like this one. Please also check out my rheumatology playlist to check out other rheumatology lessons. And thanks so much for watching, and hope to see you next time.